Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Current Affairs Unfiltered. I'm your host, Paige Fullman. It's another solo briefing room episode, which means that we are diving into the wildest, most bizarre, and most important stories of the past 2 weeks. From Elon Musk's latest antics to the White House's ongoing battles with the press and Ukraine, plus a look at what happens when MAGA influencers fight over Epstein files. There's a whole lot to cover. I'm recording this on Thursday, March 6th at about noon Eastern time, which means that anything that happens between when I'm recording this and when this gets posted on Monday is none of my business. I will start with saying that Representative Al Green, who stood up at Trump's congressional joint session address, was just censured as of this morning, which is sad. I feel like this goes in line with a lot of the battles in the press that we see where they're just silencing dissenters. I'll get into it in a little bit when I talk about the address as a whole, but I think that was important to say off the top, and that was kind of what happened this morning. Also this morning, Trump is playing games, of course, again with the tariffs on Canada and Mexico. This is now the second time he's done this, where he announces the tariffs and then goes back and forth about what's going to be included, what's not, canceling them altogether. It's just too much to keep up with. I'm not going to talk about it in depth until there's actually a plan and something, actually goes into place, because at the time that I'm recording this, I literally just got a news alert as I was sitting down that he was announcing that certain goods from Mexico will not have tariffs on them until April 2nd. So I don't know. Anyways, let's begin. Starting off strong with Elon Musk's "What did you do last week?" email. Last week, Elon Musk sent an email to all government employees with the subject line, 5 things you did last week. Essentially, it was a demand for every single government worker to basically justify their job in 5 bullet points or less, or else they could have faced being fired, according to the email. In his tweet, he said that a non-response would be considered a resignation. The email sent chaos throughout the government, with people trying to decide if they should respond to this absolutely insane email. Arguably, the funniest part to come out of this is that the email was sent from a public-facing email address, and civilians got their hands on it and then were sending their own emails of what they did last week. Musk played it off on Twitter and kind of riled up the right-wing base, saying, if people aren't going to send just bullet points saying what they did last week, do they even deserve to have a job? In my opinion, the email was ridiculous for a couple of reasons. First of all, the working theory is that he planned to collect the email responses that he got, feed them into some sort of AI system, and ask the system to look for jobs that were working inefficiently. However, what's to keep somebody from fibbing and saying they streamlined processes when they didn't? I don't know. The whole email just seemed stupid. It seemed like a scare tactic. And there were even agencies that have Trump people heading them that sent emails out and said, do not respond to that email. These included mostly intelligence agencies, but they included DOD, FBI, and Tulsi Gabbard, the queen of foreign interference, I suppose, said that their response would be read, or that they should expect that their response would be read by malign foreign actors. When Tulsi Gabbard is the one saying that, that should be a red flag, because sister is no stranger to malign foreign actors. Elon Musk threw a fit and then sent another email out and then was like, no, this one's for real this time. No development yet on what the outcome was, but ultimately the approach is super heavy-handed and fails to consider really the complexities of government jobs. And ultimately, I don't think the outcome would have been good for national security, especially if he was planning to feed these into an AI system to read them. The right loves to say butthurt emails, but when it comes to stuff like this, they've always got nothing to say, and I find that a little bit concerning, but this is still, I guess, developing. I don't think that weird emails like this are done for, but as of right now, that's kind of the whole story. Moving on and getting a little bit spooky, Trump and company are handpicking the journalists for White House briefings. The guy who claims to be the CEO of free speech is now curating who gets to ask questions at White House briefings. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, my BFF, announced that the White House would now determine the composition of the press pool on a day-to-day basis, stating that the White House Correspondents Association, quote, should no longer have a monopoly on organizing press pools. Okay. Anyways, this move has sparked backlash from media organizations and raises concerns about transparency and the administration's commitment to a free press. This is all coming at the same time that the White House banned the Associated Press from coming to briefings because they refused to put in print Gulf of America. They're still calling it the Gulf of Mexico, as they should, because we are not the only people that read newspapers. There are lots of people that read newspapers from outside of the United States. And ultimately, Trump renaming the Gulf of Mexico does not have any bearing on what the international community refers to it as. There are deeper processes to go about renaming a body of water, especially one that is bordered by many countries. But ultimately, what I think this comes down to is the fact that banning anyone or picking and choosing who gets access to the White House is a problem in and of itself, especially because I don't think they have the best intentions. I think what this is pointing to is, especially to media outlets, is that you have to stay in line if you want access to the president and to the White House. And ultimately, if they're picking and choosing who gets to come in, who gets to ask questions, that leaves room for them to pick and choose outlets that aren't going to ask them hard questions, and therefore limits what's getting out to the public. If the only people they're letting in are people that are going to throw softballs at Caroline Leavitt, like, oh, what did Mr. Trump eat for breakfast today? Do you agree that he's awesome? Like, that's not giving us any information. We need people in there that are going to ask hard questions. Joe Biden and his press secretaries let Peter Doocy of Fox News stay in there, and he always asked the dumbest questions I've ever heard. But nonetheless, he was there. He served as entertainment at the very least. I don't know. This is just the same story, different day. Everything that doesn't align with what he thinks is an affront to him, it's offensive, and unfortunately this is manifesting itself in a scary way in which we don't have a free press. And again, I think I talked about this in an earlier episode, but I worry that this indicates or will push press outlets to censor themselves, which is a big problem. It's a whole nother issue that a lot of the press outlets are owned by like bigger media companies. And those are the companies that end up getting sued by Trump and, you know, whoever else. But it worries me because what if there is some big bombshell that goes off in the Trump administration and a newspaper gets the scoop, but then they're too scared to publish it for fear of retribution and backlash by Donald Trump and the White House themselves. This is just actually just so bad and shows that his whole shtick of free speech, but it's only if you're nice to him. The banning of the AP, I think, is being fought in court right now, but all this really does in the long term is ensure that the press falls in line, which we don't want. By the way, we do not want that as the American people. We want a press that is going to ask hard questions, that is going to do the digging, that is going to call it what it is without fear of something happening to them and losing access to certain people or places. I'm pretty sure there's also another, it might be Reuters that's also banned. I literally can't even keep up. I guess I'm eager to see, like, if they do remain banned, what is their reporting like? I assume that it's just going to be a lot of, according to CNN, according to, you know, whatever outlet it is. But, you know, it's... Nonetheless, it's not good. Moving on to MAGA influencer infighting. Last week, a bunch of right-wing influencers went to the White House for a little hangout session with none other than Caroline Leavitt to chat about, I guess, unified messaging and, I don't know, hating the libs. Who knows? Biden hosted something similar, and it was basically to say that these influencers are important, and they are on the right and the left. It gets the message out. I do think the right-wing influencers are a little bit more coordinated and like have contacts within the GOP that they are then getting the messaging statement kind of from. Anyways, but my favorite person was there, of course. Chaya Raichik was there, smiling, happy. Anyways, bottom line is that after their little hangout with Caroline Leavitt, they got parts of the Epstein files. This all happened on the day that the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer was there, so there were tons of press waiting near the White House grounds to get pictures of literally anything. So essentially what happened is these influencers walk out with a binder that says The Epstein Files Part 1, brought to you by Kash Patel and Pam Bondi and Donald Trump. And because there were a bunch of cameras there, they all took pictures of these influencers smiling with the Epstein file binder. This was horrible optics across the board. To be smiling with what could be sex trafficking documents is insane behavior. I understand that it's like second nature to smile in front of a camera, but what are you doing? The MAGA rest of the influencers did not appreciate it. They were calling it a photo op, and it was a sick thing to do, which I agree, it was. Ultimately, I think some of them were hurt that they weren't invited to the MAGA influencer hangout, but they did have some pretty valid criticisms, and nothing came out of it. I just thought it was funny that there was some infighting going on over the Epstein files. And then it turned out that the Epstein files that they got in this fancy binder that they took a picture with for everybody to see was just documents that had already been released. They did, of course, include names like RFK Jr. and some members of the Trump family, such as Ivanka Trump, which, how old are these documents? Because Ivanka Trump is not that old. But anyways, some of the influencers that got the documents then backpedaled and were like, no, Pam Bondi tried to release us like more than this, but the deep state stopped her. Their stories are no longer adding up, because let's backtrack. Let us take a trip down memory lane, okay? They don't like the deep state. Donald Trump is now president and is, in his own words, firing the deep state, getting rid of anyone and anything that doesn't like him. And yet somehow, now that his people are in charge, now that there are less dissenters in the government, somehow the deep state is still there and stopping Pam Bondi from releasing more documents. Donald Trump and his people are now the quote-unquote deep state, the unelected bureaucrats. So I'm not really sure. Like, the story just is not adding up. Talk about a twisted narrative. I can't even keep up with these people. I guess there should be more to come. If the deep state does not Pam Bondi once more, there should be more documents, because, of course, the binder said part 1, which assumes that there will be a part 2. We'll see. In other GOP influencer news, Andrew Tate is back to America, where he does not belong. Suddenly, the Republican Party is arguing over him. Ben Shapiro outright calls out the stupidity of his fan base and insisted that Tate should not be allowed into the U.S. Ron DeSantis made it clear that he doesn't want Tate or his followers anywhere near Florida. Tate did come back and is reportedly in Florida. So I guess he said, screw Ron DeSantis. If you don't know who Andrew Tate is, he's a misogynist who is called for choking and beating women. He was credibly arrested for sex trafficking in Romania. And now he's back on U.S. soil doing God knows what. Stay tuned, I guess, for that one, because whatever he's doing in the U.S. can't be good. As far as I know, he hasn't had any contact with, like, politicians. But I'm not going to hold my breath on that one, because I wouldn't be surprised if there's at least one politician who's like, no, Andrew Tate, come on, let's hang out. I'll fix your public image. Moving on internationally, Trump had a chaotic meeting with Zelensky this past week. Essentially, what this meeting was for Zelensky to come and talk peace deal, but also to sign a rare minerals deal that wasn't that beneficial to Zelensky, but they were going to talk out the details and kind of figure it out. They didn't even get to discuss the deal because the meeting fell apart before they could even get behind closed doors to discuss. Okay? Usually, when a foreign figure comes to the United States, they have a pool spray or press spray, whatever. They sit in the little room and all the cameras come and they take pictures and they yell questions out. That's where we were at, okay? They were just hollering their questions. It started off pretty cordial and chummy, and it was still a little like bitter and there was a little bit of like animosity there, but it was okay. But it quickly kind of devolved into a schoolyard bullying session. It was painfully clear that Trump and Vance were not engaging in good faith negotiations. I've been waffling back and forth on if I thought that this was a setup, like if Trump and Vance went into this thinking that like this was their plan all along, that they were going to antagonize and bully him in front of the press and then kick him out of the White House and say no discussion. I don't know. I'm kind of torn because it was such a stupid thing to do, but it's stupid in my head. It might have been like the smartest thing in their head. I don't know. I do think that even if their plan wasn't to cancel the negotiations, I do think that they certainly wanted to lambast him in front of the cameras and then call it a victory. And it worked, after the meeting got called off, the clips were going viral and A lot of right-wing accounts were saying, oh, he's finally putting his foot down. I just don't think so. The other thing that's pretty clear is that Vance was the instigator. Donald Trump, honestly, in my opinion, is not a very confrontational person, but JD Vance was the one kind of egging it on, and it seemed like trying to get Trump to respond in an explosive kind of way. I do suggest you look up some of the clips from it. It was pretty disheartening to watch, overall an embarrassment. What I will say is that Zelensky did seem pretty guarded throughout the whole thing. He was sitting with his arms crossed, and I understand that that can come off as disrespectful, but at the same time, if I was sitting next to a guy that had just called me a dictator, I also would be a little bit guarded. The other thing was that you can totally tell how like unproductive the conversation was, because they would ask, I was literally watching it and getting flashbacks of like arguing with my dad as a kid, because it was a whole lot of asking Zelensky a question, Zelensky starts to answer, and then Trump and or Vance would cut him off and start talking over him, not even giving him the chance to answer the original question. And then they'd follow up and be like, well, why aren't you answering the question? And Zelensky was like, dude, I'm trying to. You're talking over me. This to me just shows that we are now aligning ourselves with the bad guys and people that we have for years and years and years called our, I don't want to say enemies, but I guess our adversaries, and people that we have spent a lot of time and money trying to outperform, and now we are trying to be besties with them. It just doesn't sit right with me. The other thing that came out of that meeting was that Trump, both out loud and on Truth Social, called Zelensky a dictator. This was in like the week leading up to it, okay? Then, during the press meeting with Zelensky, one of the reporters asked him about calling Zelensky a dictator, and Trump said, I don't think I said that. Literally, roll the tapes.
A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast, or he's not going to have a country. Zelensky. Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
If he can't remember that he called Zelensky a dictator, I am calling for a cognitive and memory test on that man. He said it multiple times. I understand that he's probably not the one running his social media, but come on. That's what I mean when I say he's not confrontational. Zelensky was sitting right there. He could have said anything about, oh, he's not having elections, whatever. And he didn't even say that. He said, I didn't say that. Sir, it's on camera. I can't. Bottom line on this story is that after Zelensky got the boot, he went to Europe. Europe rallied around him. Of course, Europe is now planning for a world that we are not going to participate in, and trying their best to kind of, in regards to Ukraine, fill the hole that the U.S. is leaving. U.S. stopped all intelligence to Ukraine, which is a problem because that's really how they figure out where to strike and what to strike. And unfortunately, I understand why he did it, but Zelensky has now come out and said, oh, I'm ready to discuss peace. I'm ready to, essentially saying I'll do it on Donald Trump's terms, which is sad. I don't think he should have to do that. He is the leader of a war-torn country, and to see him grovel at the feet of Donald Trump is so sad, given everything that's happened over the last 3 years. Okay, going domestically, we're going to talk about the House budget resolution. The House passed a budget resolution, which is basically just a statement of intent. Every Democrat and one Republican voted against it. MAGA media spun it as Democrats voted against no tax on tips. But the weird part about that is that the resolution didn't actually include any phrasing of no tax on tips. It literally is just a sheet of paper that outlines like what their whole vibe is, I guess, and which should have been a win. Like, Republicans should have been able to say, oh, we passed the budget resolution, we're ready to get to work. And instead they were like, we passed the budget resolution and Democrats want to tax your tips. That wasn't what happened. It's just so dishonest. But anyways, I guess we should be having a budget coming soon, which is important considering the fact that our government is going to shut down very soon. I think it's sometime this month, if I remember correctly. I don't know. Somebody fact check that. But this is the first step in getting a budget done. It's not probably going to be one that I support, but nonetheless, we need a budget. Okay, moving over to Europe. As I just said, they're really moving on without us. and figuring out how to support Ukraine without American backing. It really is a sign of just how much trust has eroded in US leadership. We experienced this globally the first time that Trump was president, and countries were kind of starting to plan for, the US is not so reliable anymore. This guy's kind of crazy. We need to get our affairs in order. But now we can all see that it's a full send of just backing out of international cooperation. And to me, it's also sad because the US and any country should want to be in the room shaping the next months, years, decades of global diplomacy and policy. Hamilton did have it right when they said, I want to be in the room where it happened. You do want to be in the room where it happened, okay? Because that means that you are helping make the decisions. Isolationism is not the answer. And the fact that Donald Trump and a lot of Republican talking heads are seeing this and going, okay, fine, take care of your own countries. Perfect. We will not survive being an isolationist country. We are, whether we can do it or not, whether we can be isolationist or we're not going to be able to afford the consequences that come after. We cannot be sitting on the sidelines and siding with Russia, who wouldn't know diplomacy if it hit them in the head. I am keeping an eye on this. I mostly am interested in how Europe chooses to fill that gap. I worry that China is the one that's kind of waiting in the wings to fill our shoes in their own image. I doubt that Europe will take the bait on that. That's more of a concern for me with less developed countries. But I do think this is important to keep our eyes on and kind of see where they go from here and see, especially as a peace deal with Ukraine kind of comes to be more full, that we can see what they end up doing. Moving to the measles outbreak in Texas, a 6-year-old child in Texas has died from measles in the middle of a 150 case plus outbreak. The kicker is that the area of Texas where this is happening has 13.6% of children with parents who have claimed exemptions to at least one vaccination in public schools. Officials estimate the rate to be similar among the private schools. The majority of the cases are among unvaccinated individuals, with 5 positive patients confirmed as being vaccinated. That is of 5 out of the 150 plus cases. This does not mean that the vaccine doesn't work. This is standard that when there's a large outbreak like this, that there's going to be people that are vaccinated that end up getting the disease. RFK Jr. has broken his silence and said that this is not out of the ordinary. It is out of the ordinary, Robert. He was also kind of refusing to say the quiet part out loud and say, go vaccinate your kids. He instead said that vitamin A treats the measles, which is so misleading. It's insane. Vitamin A helps measles symptoms if you are impoverished and your vitamin A levels are super low. Then it helps. When you are a kid who's decently fed in America, vitamin A isn't going to help your measles. There's been a lot of news stories talking to the adults in the town about, and it's been really interesting to see some adults have chosen to now get their kids vaccinated. Others are like, I'm going to take my chances. It's whatever. It's just the measles. Just the measles. That should not be a sentence that anybody says out loud. But it is important to keep an eye on this because it could very easily spread beyond just Texas. They are bordering, I think it is a town that borders New Mexico. So this could very easily get out of hand. Okay, moving on to good old-fashioned racism. Trump signed an executive order making English the official language of the United States. For as long as the US has been a country, there's never been an official language. I'm not incredibly well versed on how instantaneous some of this stuff is, but one of the bigger drawbacks of signing this executive order is that it creates barriers for non-English speakers, especially in things like government services and people's ability to get a translator, public education, or even emergency situations. It's not really about patriotism at all. It's about exclusion and this weird need to make everybody assimilate. This conversation is tricky to me because I understand that English is the most widely spoken language, but ultimately, if you immigrate here and you're Italian and you want to live in the local Little Italy and continue to speak Italian, that's your prerogative. You still have access to America, but it's giving you a place to be, I guess, more comfortable. And there's this weird, right-wing thing where they're like, well, you left your country. You should and not want to speak that language anymore, well, that's their mother tongue. That's their culture. You can disagree with the government and the circumstances in your country and still enjoy and want to be a part of the culture of, your people in your country. I don't know. I think this would end up affecting, I haven't gotten a lot of information on this, to be quite honest, but what I think this would end up affecting is stuff like, when you go sign government documents or you get a license and they ask, like, do you need a translator? Or when you fill out your tax documents when you get a new job and it says, do you need a translator or an interpreter? Stuff like that is, I'm pretty certain, going to go away. They're not going to ask if you need a translator. With any luck, there's going to be companies or places that will print a separate copy of documents in a few different languages, probably Spanish, Chinese. I don't even know. I think those are like the only two languages that they'd probably do it for. But nonetheless, the onus would be on them to do something like that. They wouldn't be obligated to do it, and they wouldn't be obligated to provide a translator. So I guess we're going to see how this evolves. I'm sure that this will be fought in court at some level. I'm not really sure what the standing would be on it, what the grounds for the court challenge would be, but I'm almost positive that somebody will be challenging this in court. Okay. Lastly, I want to talk about Trump's address to Congress. This was not a State of the Union because it is his first year. Therefore, there is no State of the Union. But it was the longest address in history, clocking in at about 99 minutes. I, personally, had to turn it off after 15. I just couldn't do it. For anybody that was watching, it just got really uncomfortable for me. It really made my stomach churn, and I don't know. I'm just going to go over the notes I have from the first few minutes and kind of the implications that came afterwards. One of the first things Trump says is that he has a mandate. This was something that Republicans have been saying ever since Election Day, and it really, really pisses me off when they say this, because first and foremost, Trump barely got over the 50% threshold. Actually, I don't even think he got over the 50% threshold. I think he got like 48 or 49% of the votes. That's reason number one. Second of all, an equal number of people that voted for him also didn't vote at all. So that is an entire chunk of the population that just didn't vote and didn't express their opinion. And he wants to say he has a mandate? In response to this was where Representative Al Green stood up and started heckling him and said, you don't have a mandate to cut Medicaid. True. It was overall a hot mess. The Dems were booing. The Republicans were chanting USA, which just made my stomach churn even more, because there is nothing patriotic about hurting people. The next thing he said, which killed me, it's not funny, but like, I have to laugh. When he was talking about his election win and now he has a mandate, he said something about, I was elected by, quote, a map that reads almost completely red for Republican. He is literally that meme where like they post the map and it's completely red. And I'm like, does he know what population density is? That whole map of red is the same amount of population as is in the cities. Like, I'm not, whatever. I just don't think he's ever heard of population density and doesn't understand how the map works. But after this, Mike Johnson was calling for order. There was a 2-minute standing ovation because Mike Johnson called for order. But then I was like, why aren't you calling for order? Because your own people won't shut the hell up. Clearly, he didn't mean his own side. And Al Green was removed because he stood up and said, you don't have a mandate to get rid of Medicaid and cut Medicaid. And he was right. And I will say that Donald Trump never mentioned those programs. Al Green was the only one that mentioned those in the entirety of his speech. After his removal, Republicans cheered. It really just made me sick to my stomach because if you recall, during one of Joe Biden's State of the Unions, Marjorie Taylor Greene yelled at him. So did Lauren Boebert. I can't remember what year it was, but there's pictures of them hooting and hollering and yelling at him. They didn't get removed. They didn't get censured. Why is that? I want you to think critically about that for a minute. Al Green and Marjorie Taylor Greene performed the same action. Never once was Marjorie Taylor Greene threatened with removal. Never once was she actually removed. And never once was she censured for what she did. Al Green was threatened with removal, actually removed, and censured. Anyways, the next little chunk of his speech was really just villainizing of Democrats. He was saying stuff like they won't stand and cheer no matter what I do. I could solve cancer and they wouldn't cheer. First of all, I feel like he's overestimating his abilities because what is he going to do to fix cancer? The bottom line on this for me was You're a criminal with horrible ideas. I don't think people should have to cheer for that. The only reason your people are cheering is because they are scared of losing their jobs. That is it. At one point, there was a little boy with cancer who had a dream of being a Secret Service officer, and Trump let him be a Secret Service officer. Democrats didn't clap for that. Republicans are really clinging on to that. What I have to say about that, I stole this joke from my friend. That seems like a DEI hire to me. The 13-year-old with cancer gets to be a Secret Service agent? That's a DEI hire. I don't think he's qualified. I don't know. Just seems suspicious to me. Generally, though, the speech was to be expected. It was the usual craziness filled with a lot of lies, a lot of half-truths, and Al Green was the only one that stood up. Right before the speech, there were a few Democrats posting on social media being like, oh, this is the energy that I'm bringing to the joint address tonight. Rightfully, people in the comments were like, no, you didn't. Al Green brought it. What are you doing? Democrats had their signs that said things. Some said lies. Some were wearing t-shirts that said stuff about there are no kings here. I don't have a script for this part. We're going off the cuff. It's hard for me to be mad at them when we see what happened to Al Green. Would it have been any better if all of them got removed? I'm not sure. I think they did what they could, but to post on social media and be like, this is the energy I'm bringing, I'm gonna do this and that, like during the speech, and then to not do anything is just not the right messaging in my opinion. And I still think that they have a messaging problem. They need to get it together. But what I will say is that a bunch of Democrats all posted the same video with the same script, and the right wing is trolling them, rightfully so, because get your own message. Stop using the same script that the DNC or whatever organization sent you to record a social media video. Like, can you be original? You don't have one original thought about what Donald Trump and Elon Musk and all his little cronies are doing. You feel like you have to follow the script, the approved script. Like, I'd love to get more information on where that video came from. But they do really need to get it together. I think they did what they could, but it certainly was not enough. What I also thought was funny was people, specifically Democrats, leaving. Bernie Sanders left, and he had a couple like funny, witty comments to the press. Just from like a logistical side, though, Donald Trump really could have used this speech to justify what he was doing and explain what he was doing, and he really didn't do that. He has pretty bad polling numbers, and this speech was a great opportunity to pull those up, and I think he spent too much time focusing on, villainizing Democrats and not really talking through his plans, where there are so many people confused about the tariffs and are you cutting Medicaid and Social Security? And he just didn't spend any time on the topics that matter most to people. It was really just his same playbook that he does like at a rally. Okay, before we wrap up, I want to address the rumor, nay, conspiracy theory, I guess, that Donald Trump can't read. Okay, so there's this clip of Pete Davidson talking about Donald Trump going on SNL, and Pete Davidson says that he doesn't really know how to read. So we'll roll the cameras.
For real. Yeah, and he loves to improv. Yeah. So during like the table read, he before he had to read each line, and he's the host, so he's in everything. Yeah. He would go, I'm not going to say this. I think I'm going to say it the way I want to say it. Is that okay? Is that okay, Lauren? And then this is my favorite part, is there was a sketch that we wrote where he's at Disneyland with his daughter, and the line is, all right, let's get out of here. Turkey legs? Let's go get turkey legs. And he doesn't know how to read. So he went, all right, let's get out of here, turkey legs.
Okay, so that's the start of this. I thought that was, a silly, funny story until I saw the pool spray with Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK. Okay? I'll play the clip afterwards. Keir Starmer pulls out a letter from King Charles and tells Trump to read it. It's like a 2-page letter. It would take a couple minutes to read it. And Donald Trump is like, wait, you want me to read this now? He's like, yeah, well, I need to tell King Charles what your reaction was. Donald Trump's like, oh, okay. He pulls it out. And again, it's a couple pages, so it should take a minute to read. He glances over it, flips it over, and is like, oh, look at this signature. It's a great signature. Clearly, not even reading it. And then hands it back to Keir Starmer and goes, why don't you read that really good paragraph in there that's super important? Here's the clip.
From His Majesty the King, a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter I'll bring it to you. So can I present?
Yeah, as a king. Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please read it.
I will do. I've got to tell him what your reaction is. I need to know. He's a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. Perhaps you'd like to say what that very important part is?
Yeah, so this is a letter from His Majesty the King. It's an invitation for a second state visit. This is really special. This has...
So that was that. The other thing is that since Trump's first presidency ended, a lot of his people have come out and said how difficult it was to get him to read the daily briefings and how he wanted it to be more pictures. After watching that interaction with Keir Starmer, I'm now fully in the camp that Donald Trump cannot read. The SNL thing was like funny. The pictures on the press briefings was embarrassing, but maybe he's a visual learner. I can excuse that. Watching and listening to that interaction with Keir Starmer just puts it over the edge for me that he just doesn't have the ability to read. And I was talking to my mom about it, actually. And my mom was like, well, think about his age. Like, if he has some sort of problem, like dyslexia, it was so much harder to diagnose that. Not even harder. People didn't diagnose that back when he was a kid. So he could have been struggling with it for so long, and now he's just at an age where it's, I guess, embarrassing to admit that he can't read or has a reading disability. And I don't know. I'm keeping my eyes on this because this seems so insane, but now like so plausible. This seems a little bit more plausible than Lea Michele not being able to read either. Oh my God. If you find any other evidence of Donald Trump being unable to read or articulate something on a page, let me know. I'd love to. You know what my other piece of evidence is? Actually, you know what? I'm not even done. My other piece of evidence is the fact that he's anti-teleprompter. And you can tell because when he does all his rally speeches, he just rambles because there's nothing that he's reading off of. And he thinks it's like a strong suit. Oh, I don't need a teleprompter. First of all, he sounds crazy when he does it because he's just rambling. But second of all, I think he doesn't have the teleprompter because he couldn't read it, even if he had it. Oh my God. Please, if you have any evidence, send it my way. I'd love to read more about it. Somebody get the Trump kids on the phone and ask if Donald ever read them like bedtime stories or something. Please, let me know. Man loves picture books, I suppose. Anyways, that is officially all I have for you. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Current Affairs Unfiltered. I will be back next week to dive into public education and the Department of Education with guest Jasmine Bolton, which is definitely a fitting topic to be talking about because yesterday we found out that Donald Trump was planning to sign an order abolishing the Department of Education. So I guess we will see how timely that conversation ends up being. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, or share it with somebody who could use this information. Maybe share it with your favorite Donald Trump can't read conspiracy theorist. As always, if you have questions, topic suggestions, or just want to say hi, you can find me on social media at Current Affairs Unfiltered Pod on Instagram, or send me an email at currentaffairs.unfilteredpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Keep asking questions, stay engaged, and remember to read. I'll see you guys next week.